Hello guys, and welcome to this second part of the routing and ngView lesson. If you remember, in the previous lesson we have set up a few routes, the about.html, contact.html, and the otherwise route that we use when the user will type a URL which we don't know anything about, which is not defined in our config module. We also notice that the links that are generated by default by Angular have this sharp sign in front of them, which is not really SEO friendly. So there's something we can do about it, and I'll show you that in a minute. But before then, I just want to do a quick recap on what we have seen so far. We talk about the route provider that exposes two main methods. The first one is when, which is used to map the URLs, as you can see. It takes two parameters, the URL and an object with other parameters, which can be the template URL, the controller. We didn't talk about that yet, but you can actually tie a controller to a specific view if you want that the view about.html is managed by an about controller. You can supply that as a parameter when actually creating the routing. There are other methods that you can use, like controller_as. If you remember, we had a lesson about the controller_as syntax, template, resolve, and redirect to that we had just seen. Template and resolve is something that we'll talk about later on. Before looking at how we can modify our code so that we can supply a controller for our views, I just want to show you how to change these bad-looking URLs. To do so, we will use another provider that we will inject after the root provider. Therefore, we can just inject here location provider. I'm writing the annotation as usual, and here I'll inject again the provider, location provider. So what we can do with this location provider? After defining our routing, we can enable the so-called HTML5 mode. And to do so, we just type $location provider .html5 mode. That takes a boolean parameter and will set it to true. Basically, the configuration we just set is telling Angular, and specifically the location provider, to use the HTML5 history API. It will use the history push state to retrieve our URLs. So what we want to do now is to change our index.html. We just scroll up, we get rid of these sharp signs, and then what we need to do, if we want to use the HTML5 mode, is to set a base URL. So we want base href to be our root. So this should be sufficient. And then we can save our code and refresh our application. So in here, I click on the About link, and as you can see, we got rid of the bad looking sharp sign, and same happens if I click my contact page. And that's basically it. In the third chapter about routing and views, we'll see how to tie a controller to our views and also how to provide URLs with parameters. So something like we want to pass the first name to our controller, but we want to do that through the URL. There's a very easy way to do that with our routing provider, and I'll show you how to do that in the next lesson.